Good afternoon, Adam.
There we are. How are you?
Pretty good, and yourself?
I'm doing okay. Things have been busy around here. How for the CDL?
Oh, yeah, there's no end to busyness. I think I need to make a new poster or something. We've been doing more with less for so long that pretty soon we won't even be here, but the work will still continue on, right?
Right.
The ghosts of CDL workers will keep things going forward. Do
Well,
anything
all
fun
that
this
stuff.
summer?
I'm sorry?
Do anything fun this summer yet?
Not so far. I've got family coming into town just after UCCSC. So I'm going to take off a couple of weeks.
Hmm.
Then we're
Right.
going to play tourist in my own town, which is always fun.
Yeah, exactly. Do all those things that, that you never make time to do, but that people travel thousands of miles to experience.
Yeah. How about yourself?
I just got back. I was on vacation last week. We went up the coast to Mendocino for 5 days and stayed at a bed and breakfast and left the kids at home and came home and the house was still intact. So a good time was had all the way around.
That's good. That'll be a memorable trip for everybody, it sounds like.
That's exactly right. Well, we've got a 17-year-old and a 36-year-old. So you would think when you get them together that the ages would average out, right? And they'd act like a 25-year-old or something like that. But actually, what happens is they both regress and they both act like 13-year-olds. Not quite sure how that happens, but I think it's a boy thing. We never had that kind of problem with our daughter. So.
I've definitely got that to look. Mine are a bit younger, and I've got those years still ahead of me. So.
Oh. How old are you?
7 and 4.
7 and 4.
Yeah.
Both boys?
Both girls.
Oh, both girls. So yeah. So at least you won't be having the conversation that like the ones I had with my son, when you find out that they actually did the homework and it's in the backpack and they just didn't turn it in, and that's why they're failing the class.
Yeah.
I've never heard of a girl actually falling in that category, right? That seems like it's strictly a boy kind of thing, because that Y chromosome, short circuit something.
It's the problem multitasking. That's something.
It is certainly is a problem. Anyway, you get some clear sailing probably until about junior high school with the girls, and then it's all about the peer pressure and the body image and the cattiness, and then things can tend to go off the rails. So my advice is Catholic schools and mean nuns.
That's right.
And speaking of nuns, good afternoon, Joe.
Speaking of nuns, okay, I don't know what was the joke about, but I heard about Catholic school. Nothing wrong with Catholic school.
You only heard about it? You haven't experienced the ruler across the knuckles?
Oh no, when I went to Catholic school, well, we didn't have that. Not that kind of punishment. It was cleaning up the schoolyard, which was really big.
Mm-hmm.
I was taking a ruler across the knuckles, though.
Yeah, exactly. Anything, can be painful, but then it's over.
That's right.
Of course, it's really shocking when you don't see them coming. They just sneak up behind you. I guess, yeah. I wonder when they got away from corporal punishment in Catholic schools. Probably some bleeding heart liberal thing. All right, we're up to a whopping 6. I think we may have a low attendance because of the summertime, but we'll give it a couple more minutes and hope to attract a larger audience before we get going. In the meantime, everyone should plan for their paper, What I Did with AWS on My Summer Vacation.
Okay, so this is my first time using Blue Jeans. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Vicky, we certainly can, or at least I can.
I can tell Adam can hear me because I can see him smirking at me.
Audio is functional.
That wasn't a smirk. That was a wholesome smile. A good-hearted smile.
Technology just boggles my mind. I have to unmute the mic on my computer so that you can hear me talk on my telephone.
Isn't that? Yes. I'm really looking forward to the Internet of Things where, you open up your refrigerator door and everything will just stop functioning. And if that aspect of technology should also give you pause when you think about autonomous vehicles as well.
Yeah, my son's all excited about that. He thinks he's not going to have to learn to drive.
That'll work as long as you have cell signal or whatever the dependencies are.
Exactly.
Little does he know, next time we're out in the desert camping, he'll be, I'll get out and tell him if he wants to get back, he has to drive.
That'll be the new definition of roughing it.
That's right. Well, so my 17-year-old just started driving, so I actually bought my brother's old truck so that we would have a stick shift for him to learn on, because I wanted him to learn on that. So I guess what he'll do to his kids is he'll actually get them a car that's not autonomous, and he'll force them to learn how to actually use the steering wheel and everything. All right. Well, it's almost 5 after, so I guess we'll get rolling. For the few, the proud, and the brave that called in today, we might pick up a little more. Hopefully, Alan will join us, or Aaron will join us, since he's the only one that actually signed up with an issue. If not, we might have a very short meeting. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our July meeting. As usual, I'll reiterate to those of you who are here that participation is the key to making a group like this sustainable, and by thanking those that have agreed to contribute content or ideas to this meeting. I did manage to get the blank agendas posted online in the Google Drive through the end of this calendar year. So if you haven't already, please go out there and sign up for a future meeting to share some AWS related information, some experiences you've had, or even questions and concerns regarding the platform. again, the more interaction that we have, the more useful it is to everyone who's participating. Our very own Adam Tillman has volunteered to coordinate the August meeting, which is going to be in person at UC San Diego during the UCCSC conference. It will be held Monday afternoon. And so I will break here and let him provide any details that are known at this particular point in time.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Kurt. So, yeah, we have a place and we have a time. We have a room reserved in UCSD's Student Center, Price Center, where a number of these breakout meetings are being held. We've got the room from noon until 5, which is when we would ordinarily probably be heading down to the welcome reception. We don't need to start at 5. Start at noon. In fact, I'm planning on us starting at 3. But I just wanted to mention that in case there was interest in people getting together for informal discussion prior to 3 o'clock start time. I'm going to send out a message to the mailing list today with these details. Heather Matson and her crew are going to be there from Amazon. And there will be a raffle, must be present to win. We're still working out the question of remote participation. There has been some interest in that, and the room that we're in is particularly unsuited to remote participation. But I will keep everybody posted on that front. I think beyond the Q&A and kind of roundtable discussion with Amazon, similar to what we had last year, we were, and I forget his name, is putting together an agenda of discussion topics.
Right, Glenn Blackler.
Glenn Blackler, thank you. And so if anybody has anything to add to that, please feel free to take a stab at putting something on the agenda.
Okay, and I'll dive in and add, yes, I believe the Northern California AWS team will be there as well. So those of you in Northern California who have worked with Matt Jameson and his crew, they will be attending. They are happy to present and share information. So if there is a topic of general interest that you would like to hear from the AWS team on, again, get that surfaced early, and we can ask them to share information on that. Also, we'll spend at least some time in the in-person meeting talking about how these monthly meetings have gone, talking about any changes or improvements that you can suggest in order to improve participation, share more information, take a different approach. Again, we're open to any and all of that. This last year has sort of been an experiment, mainly directed by what I thought might be useful or interesting. And so there's probably been enough of that, and it certainly is appropriate for the group as a whole to chime in and start steering the direction of what we're doing. So please think about that over the next month, and even if you're not able to attend in person and we can't provide remote access to the meeting, you can always send suggestions or ideas to me and I can represent them in the general discussion. So keep that in mind, and thanks again, Adam, for coordinating that and getting everything set up for that meeting. I'll make a quick reminder that I'm still looking for our spectacular AWS failure story. So if you or someone you know has had a spectacular failure in the AWS environment, if you can share that information or get them to share that information, you'll be due a prize as well for that. Again, under the heading of we learn just as much, if not more, from our mistakes as from our failures as from our successes. We'd like to be talking about that as well. We're also still looking for a speaker to talk about using OpsWorks Chef or Chef Automate on the AWS platform. So if you actually have experience with those tools, please volunteer to share that with the wider group at an upcoming meeting. And I was going to congratulate Greg Merritt again while he was here, but it looks like he's not here. So that, as far as I know, is the end of my prepared notes. And other than Adam, the only person on the agenda was Aaron Kulich, who apparently is unable to make the call this month. So we'll be carrying that forward to next month, which means that I'm now opening up the call to the floor. So anyone who is on the call who has information to share, questions to ask, or a topic that they'd like to hear about in future meetings, now's the time to speak up.
Why the focus on Chef and OpsWorks?
It's not a focus on them per se, but we've had a couple of presentations about automated deployment tools on the AWS platform, and that was the one that was missing. So someone talked about using Puppet, someone else talked about using an Ansible solution, and also the code tools, so code pipeline, code deploy, code build, and whatever the heck the fourth code tool was.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that there's a large community out there that's using OpsWorks and Chef Automate, and so there was general interest in hearing how that compared to the other solutions. While I have that out there, I'll also mention that after Tom Kuhn, I think, shared his experience with the code set of AWS tools, and he expressed that it was a little bit confusing to understand exactly how all four of those work together and where the handoffs were, etc. That we did arrange a call for him with the product team manager from AWS. And so we're asking him to bring whatever information they shared with him back to the team at a future meeting.
I unfortunately couldn't make the Puppet version, and I missed the Ansible too, because this is my first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody willing to kind of brief me on what they've said so far, and maybe confirm or deny my impression that Puppet is a little better for, let's say, keeping a standard configuration, like if you're interested in security and keeping things static, whereas Chef is a little bit better for more DevOps, more dynamic things that are changing a lot, things that change other things.
That's certainly my understanding and belief, as you captured it there. I'll let Joe Samantan on my team knows a bit about Puppet, so he can chime in from that point of view. Also, to your point about what has happened previously, we have been recording these meetings, and we're struggling to make them available after the fact, primarily because I don't know how many of you are aware, but UC Berkeley last year got hit with this DOJ lawsuit about accessibility of content. And that includes contributed content. And so they've got this campus-wide initiative where you have to jump through a large number of hoops in order to make content available publicly. And since we're actually leveraging Blue Jeans account that's hosted at Berkeley, unfortunately, we've been caught up with that. But hopefully, in the not too distant future, we'll be able to make these make the recordings of past meetings public. And also, if you look back at past agendas, I think most of them have a link out to the presentation materials, and they also have contact information for the presenters who have all indicated they are willing to be contacted directly to talk in more depth about whatever the topic is that they presented on. So that said, Joe, do you want to chime in with your 2 cents about Puppet?
Yeah, sure. So for Puppet in our environment, Vicky, what we're using that for is, well, a couple of things. One is we maintain state in our system files, and we use that as a way to deploy changes to all our clients. Um, so there's that, and then we also work with a different group, a programming group, where they use the Puppet tool for deploying package and utilities and configuration changes. But that's at the role account level, application level. But that's how we're using Puppet. And as far as your question regarding, I think Chef, right? We're one of our colleagues, Deborah, is looking into that tool, and we're looking at other tools for possibly using that instead of Puppet. But it's kind of just in the stages of research right now, where we're just looking at different tools, and that's where we're at right now with that.
What would tip you over the edge to, I don't know how vested you are in Puppet. We're pretty vested in it, and so the idea of converting everything to Chef doesn't really appeal, especially since the way we use it is not so much for DevOps, it's more for consistency of state.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We're pretty much. Go ahead.
Would you guys be converting over all of your existing Puppet stuff, or are you just gonna only do new stuff on Chef? How would you manage that migration?
If we were to do it, and again, it's sort of just a thought experiment at this point in time, we'd convert all our modules over, and we would sunset Puppet and just go forward with Chef. So some of the reasons why we're looking at that is because we've standardized on AWS Linux, and Puppet Enterprise doesn't officially support that OS, and so there is some concern as to whether we could have support issues in the future. We haven't so far, but again, there is sort of that risk out there. What that also means is that even though almost all of our systems are using AWS Linux, we've got to spin up and support a Red Hat Linux for the Puppet Enterprise server, and that turns out to be additional work, right? It's just additional complexity, additional work in the environment. And then last but not least, the cost of Puppet, well, at least the current way we're licensing it, it's more about a static environment, right? You buy a set number of licenses, and you pay for those, whether they're actually managing a system or not. Whereas with the Chef Automate, in so the hosted Chef version, or the service that AWS provides, you only pay basically for the systems that are being managed. So it's more applicable to an on-demand infrastructure where you've got systems that are up, down, and transient systems, as opposed to our existing Puppet environment, which is more based on sort of a always-on more static infrastructure.
Okay, that's a good point. All of our stuff is always on.
Right. So, but absolutely, I mean, the cost of change, retooling, not just retooling, but learning a new tool, is pretty substantial. So it'll have to be a pretty compelling argument, I think, before we go ahead and make the jump, if we do.
I've also it's compelling because integration is great. So if Amazon is supporting ops work, that's awesome. But I've also heard that their version of Chef is a little different from what you get off on the street from Chef itself. Have you heard anything along those lines?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. As Joe said, we had a different member of my team has been looking into it. So we could ask the question. It certainly wouldn't surprise me, right? Because that's how we ended up with AWS Linux, right? So they took their own branch of CentOS
Exactly.
and went with it. So that's sort of I think par for the course with most AWS services, right? Elasticsearch, et cetera, that they will they will adopt open source or available frameworks modify them as they see fit, and then you've got to put up with those differences. In order to get the advantage of the hosted service, you have to put up with those differences. Alternatively, you have got to spin up an EC2 instance and run the sort of the stock version, and then you don't get the benefits of a hosted service out of it.
Right. Okay.
Anyone else have any experience on that they want to chime in?
I'll just say at UCI, we're using Ansible to manage Linux system level configuration, both in AWS in the future and on-premise currently. Actually, already in AWS to some extent. And as far as managing AWS resources, we're going down the road of exploring initially actually a commercial product, just at a pre-sales level, Cisco Cloud Center, which is AWS but also other platforms. And we also have our eyes on Terraform. And so I'm kind of curious if others are looking at things that are, because I think of Chef and Puppet and Ansible, although they do have AWS and other cloud provider plugins these days, their kind of origins, I think, are more OS level. And there are other tools that are more built for platforms like AWS or VMware, like Terraform and Cloud Center and others. So I'm kind of curious what others' experience is or thoughts are on that.
So here at UCSD, my team, which is a small part of our overall AWS efforts, is using Terraform, and I'd be happy to put you in contact with the person on my team who's been leading up that effort. For us, the decision really came down to something like Terraform or using AWS-specific tools like CloudFormation, and we wanted to go with a platform that could span multiple providers. And wasn't expensive, and so Terraform seemed like a pretty good fit at that point. He'd be able to say more about the exact decision process that led to Terraform over some of the other options.
Are you running Terraform on premise at your data center?
We are not running it on premise right now. We are running it. It is only handling our AWS deployments.
Yep. And that's actually an interesting conversation, I've had in various flavors with various people that, there's certainly a large portion of the IT community that's interested in remaining sort of vendor agnostic, right, or vendor neutral, and working in that direction. On the other hand, as we ourselves have experienced and many others have demonstrated, to get the maximum sort of cost and functionality benefits out of cloud providers, to a certain extent, you really have to drink the Kool-Aid and buy into their approach to things. Otherwise, you're basically just creating a hodgepodge of solutions that don't give you the flexibility and the benefits that these environments are really created to provide. And so it's definitely something that you need to be aware of and make conscious decisions of, and be aware ahead of the time what the ramifications of that decision are going to be.
Yeah, I'll say at UCI, we have a mandate from executives to still keep flexibility around platform, but there's an awareness, I think, among most everyone that what you just said, Kurt, is probably something we're going to end up realizing and following long term. But still, there's some executive need to have some flexibility, at least in principle. So that's why we're looking at platforms like Terraform or Cisco Cloud Center. As well as Ansible, because we're not going to abandon what's going on campus, of course, and we have a lot of resources that our Unix Linux management group is managing on campus and using Ansible to do that. We want to have that unified. So at the OS and application level, that's a reason to use a unified tool for us.
Certainly, and it's again, it's very common, especially for sort of senior management, because risk management is one of the things that they're responsible for, and that will come up on any type of IT or security audit, right? So the sort of the issue of vendor lock-in, and how neutral are you, or how capable are you of changing gears if AWS craters tomorrow, right? then how easy is it going to be for you to move to the next cloud provider of choice? Um, and so you'll get those questions regardless of what the ultimate decision is. That will always be a question that you'll have to speak intelligently to. And again, if you're not going to take a sort of a neutral approach, then you just have to have a well-reasoned argument for why not, and and what are our plans if in the event we do this becomes an issue down the road. Other questions, comments, or concerns? I guess on that subject, I have one other thing to share. Sort of in the same vein, was on a call, a NISO call, at least a year ago now, I think, and it was focused mainly on libraries, academic libraries, and they were talking about adopting the cloud and using the cloud. And so I had given my usual spiel about how great AWS was, and how our organization was all in with AWS, and we're getting all these great benefits. And then a representative of Harvard Library, I think, spoke up and said, everything you say is really great, and yet AWS has been around for 8 years. And our library has been around for 200 years. And so, how do I make the case that, I'm going to take something that has that kind of longevity and move it into this technology world, which is actually very young and changing very fast? How do I justify that, and how do I plan for that? Um, and so I hadn't actually thought about that, because I'm not from the Harvard Library. Um, but I said off the top of my head what I think is a true statement, which is that just like anything else related to sort of longevity and preservation, basically you're planning for a constant migration, right? A constant change, a constant migration. And so while today you may be migrating into the AWS platform, you need to realize that tomorrow you may be migrating from AWS to somewhere else, and also from when it comes to preservation and disaster recovery types of things, it may very well be that your future is again replicating data and systems from cloud provider, cloud platform, cloud provider to cloud provider, in order to provide the appropriate sort of redundancy and security required for long, again, real long-term efforts like library preservation, etc. It doesn't apply to short-term research, computing needs. But when you start talking about moving central IT functions into the cloud, then there's some additional requirements and questions that need to be asked, thought put into it.
Now I'm kind of curious. Is everybody here central IT? Or are there any other research supporters like me?
Doesn't sound like it today, but in general there are. Again, Aaron Kulik, who had been signed up to speak today, actually leads the cloud computing working group for UC Berkeley, and they're almost completely focused on research computing. As a matter of fact, he would be a good contact for you to tie into, because he actually does. They do bi-weekly meetings. So once a month, their cloud working group actually sits in on this call, and then in between these calls, he actually has um, another meeting, which they call basically the research computing track. So they call this sort of the infrastructure IT track, and then they have another meeting on the off 2 weeks that talks about research computing issues, and they share research computing projects, etc.
That does sound like a good idea. Yeah, I have a lot of the same problems, but I solve them different ways because of I am shorter term. I'm funded differently.
Hmm. Absolutely, and again, that working group sort of used to combine everything together because this user group didn't exist, and so when we spun this up, then he took advantage of that opportunity to separate those out into different tracks and be able to focus a little more for each group on the things that were specific to their needs.
Okay, and while I'm being the problem child that I typically am, I can't find the Puppet, this agenda that has the Puppet stuff on it.
Okay, I'll make a note and look, and maybe I misspoke, and we haven't actually had an external presentation on Puppet. In which case we can set one up in the future, because again, my team certainly uses that, and we'd be happy to share our experience.
Okay, cool. Cool for me to just email Aaron out of the blue? Hey, Kurt said I could email you.
Absolutely. Again, Aaron's a very helpful, friendly guy. I don't think he'll have any problem with that at all, and he's always happy to extend the the group of people that's talking about research IT.
Okay, cool.
And certainly use my name in vain, so that if he gets upset with anyone, it's me. He's a Bart right away, so he can always come over, have lunch with me, and give me a hard time about whatever it is.
Handing out his email address to strange people on video conferences.
That's correct. No, it's called networking within UC, so not a problem.
Cool. Thank you. Okay,
I'm
stop now.
Okay, well, you don't have to. If you still have burning questions, feel free to bring them up. Does anyone else have something they want to bring up or share? All right, we'll have a quick shout out. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, this is David Keel at UCI again. One of the things I'm learning, I spoke, I think it was last month, about our border security architecture, and one of the big lessons there I'm learning that's interesting, I'm curious if other people have had thoughts about this too, is when you're tying together multiple VPCs, whether you use VPNs, as a number of architecture examples provide for routing, like transit VPC architecture, or whether you use VPC peering. And so I'm kind of curious if other people have run into that decision point and what direction they've gone. Do you know if that's anyone here have that experience or hear of it within the UCs?
Well,
At Santa Cruz, we're using peering.
Okay.
Right, and at CDO, we're using peering as well.
Okay. Are you doing routing or anything else, or is it strictly VPC to VPC conversations? I mean, you can't do routing with peering, so my question isn't about routing in the normal sense, but about proxying.
Right. No, everything's across the peering connection. We're not using proxies at this time.
And you're not using proxies to reach from one VPC to a proxy in a second, and from there to a third location?
No, all the traffic we have. Okay, so we have two VPCs and they're paired between each other, and we just have any internal traffic, basically instances and RDS systems. They communicate internally, but anything that goes out is going through the internet gateway.
And you have an internet gateway in each VPC that needs that, or a routing from each subnet on each VPC that needs that?
That's right.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I think what we're doing is unusual, so I'm just always curious, though, if it's less unusual than I think it is.
What are you guys doing? I'm just curious.
We have a mandate to have Palo Alto virtual appliances having all the internet egress and ingress traffic passing through them. And so you can set up Palo Altos in each VPC, but that gets expensive pretty quickly. So we're centralizing them using more or less transit VPC architecture. But transit VPC architecture in the traditional sense uses VPN connections between VPCs so that you can route. And that just looked like a very non-scalable and less maintainable solution to me. So I actually am going down the road of using VPC peering, and because you can't route transitively, then using proxies, basically.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
I've spoken with other people. I don't recall off the top of my head whether they're UC or not, who are using a sort of a similar architecture. They're looking for more segregation between their environments, and they're also looking for a sort of a least it's like a least privilege model for networks, right? So it's, you know, everything there's no traffic allowed out except things that go through the proxy, and they're strictly defined on the proxy what they're allowing.
Right.
No.
Yep, that's very much like what we're doing for egress, and then after the proxy, it goes through the Palo Alto.
Right.
And for incoming, it goes through the Palo Alto, and there's either NAT or proxying, so the return traffic has to land in the border VPC.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's again, I think we'll see more of those types of architectures as the central IT organizations have more adoption within AWS. When it's sort of individual researchers or research IT, it's much more common for them to just go out and do a single tier architecture, single VPCs, not really worry about too much. It's a pretty small environment, and they just worry about sort of the perimeter security, maybe to a certain extent. And obviously, as central IT starts moving larger enterprise applications into an AWS environment, then there's more concern with doing an in-tier architecture and separating those tiers out using VPCs and or proxies or some other method where you're tightly controlling access between the tiers and to the external world. So I expect, again, more and more of that over time.
Okay, thank you all.
Certainly. I noticed Carol has joined us. Carol, is it okay if I call you after this call? Do you have a couple of minutes to talk?
Yeah, sure. Do you have my cell phone number?
I think so.
Okay.
Either that or your desk number.
Okay.
Why are you out on the beach? Do I need to call you on your cell?
I'm in Scotts Valley, our Scotts Valley location, not on campus at my desk. So.
Okay. Well, if you don't hear from me in 10 minutes, then you can just email me with your cell phone. I'll call you right back.
All right, will do.
All right, thanks. Okay, so absent anything else? Going once, going twice? Sounds like sounds like we're done for today. So you get some time back. Thank you very much, those of you who did join us today. Those of you who had questions, Vicki, if it was your first time, I appreciate, again, you having questions. Again, the point of this call is not just to present information or answers, but also to share questions and have group discussions about those and find out, again, what approaches or thoughts other people have. So I appreciate you speaking up as you did. And that said, we'll sign off now, and I will see some of you in August in San Diego.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks all.
Bye.